As I mentioned, today we're celebrating the second anniversary of the Dobbs decision when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade after nearly 50 years of abortion and literally millions of innocent lives lost. Of course, this comes at a time when the two parties' approach to the sanctity of human life and how to protect the most vulnerable as image bearers of God, the difference between the two parties simply could not be more clear than right now. With another election season approaching, how should those who support life respond? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Nathaniel Moran. He serves on 3 House committees, including the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Judiciary. He represents the 1st Congressional District of Texas. Congressman Moran, always great to have you. Welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Jody. It's always great to be here with you.
All right, I was just thinking about this. 2 years of the huge decision. You were actually 2 years ago. You were the Republican nominee campaigning for your first congressional term when that decision came out. Give us your reaction at the time. Do you remember it?
Well, the reaction was elation and overjoyed. That's what we had been looking for since the 70s when Roe was wrongly decided. We needed a Supreme Court, and thanks to President Trump, we got a Supreme Court that looked straight to the constitutional text and determined that Roe was wrongly decided and needed to be overturned.
Absolutely. And I'm actually going to be going into this a little bit more in the next segment. But, Biden's reelection campaign, their focus seems the entire focus is all about abortion. And that has made an enormous contrast, quite frankly, between the parties. And it's crystal clear where the two parties stand on this. How should Republicans use this, in your opinion, to promote a message of life?
Well, I think the real contrast here is when you talk in terms like the Democrats. Here's what the Democrats say. They say they want to focus on rights, reproductive rights, regardless of morality. That's really what they want to do. But on the conservative Republican side, we want to talk about responsibility rooted in morality. That's the real difference between the positions here is we want to go in and we want to talk in terms of hope and support for women and infants and children, both before and after birth. And we want to recognize that there is a creator in this world that created us and for a specific purpose. And just look to Jeremiah 1:5. When we're talking about a Christian worldview, we know the words of Jeremiah really affirm what we believe, and that is, before we were formed, God knew us. Before we were born, He actually set us apart, and He appointed us to something specific in this life. So it's great to be known, to be set apart, and to be appointed, and all that happened before birth, and that validates what we know, and that is life begins at conception.
Extremely well said, Congressman, and that is really what this whole argument ends up coming down to. And so that you couldn't have said it any more clearly. If I can, let's switch topics because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has gone public, as we all know, with his request for munitions that have been held up by the Biden administration, who frankly promised to help Israel defeat Hamas. What's the holdup?
The Biden administration has admitted pausing or holding up at least one, several thousand bombs and munitions that were needed for the Rafah engagement. And now there's suspicion that they're holding up others. Senator Tom Cotton just sent a letter this week to the White House saying, we want to understand exactly what you're doing because you're supposed to notify Congress when you send weapons and munitions. And there's not been the notifications forthcoming that we would have anticipated. And as a result of that, there's suspicion that they are sitting on these weapons. They're, quote, in process, according to the White House, but they're not where they need to be, and that's in the hands of the Israelis to defend their country.
Yeah, and you really start wondering who's telling the truth here. As you mentioned, they admitted some time back that they were pausing the munitions release, and now they're coming out, Karine Jean-Pierre and company have come out saying we don't know what the prime minister is talking about. And so they're kind of on both sides of the fence. Is this an example of the gaslighting that the left loves to talk about?
No question about that. And they always just delay the information. It takes us additional additional avenues and pushing and force and legislative action to actually extract the information they don't want us to have, they don't want the American public to have. But once we push, we find out the truth, and the truth is hardly ever what Karine tells us in her press conferences.
Well, it's just stunning that we're even in this situation, and I know we'll probably be talking about this more, but as the Prime Minister Netanyahu will be coming to a joint session there in Congress, that's gonna be a powerful time as that unfolds in about a month from now. But again, let's move on to, there's about 100 victims, I'm sure you saw this, of the October terrorist attacks in Israel. About 100 of those individuals now are suing UNRWA, the United Nations Organization for Palestine. The lawsuit basically says that UNRWA has helped Hamas build up the terror infrastructure and the personnel that were actually necessary to carry out those October 7th attacks. The U.S. has suspended aid to UNRWA, but should this suspension, do you think, be permanent?
Absolutely. UNRWA is totally unreliable. They're not pro-American. They're not pro-Israel. They're pro-Hamas. We saw in our Foreign Affairs Committee hearings information that led us to understand that there were several involved from UNRWA directly with the attacks on October 7th. And then when you dig deeper, you find out really there's a Hamas sympathizer agenda among UNRWA totally. So we cannot trust them with any kind of money and any kind of funds. We need to extract that, which we have done this year, but we need to make it permanent.
And what is the appetite for that in Congress? Do you think that permanent defunding of UNRWA has momentum to go forward?
Oh, absolutely. I think it does, because even folks on the Democratic side of the aisle, they recognize that there is a problem here, that we have to have people that are allied with us and our national strategic interests before we start giving them money. We don't need to give people money that are going to go in and educate kids against America and against Israel. We certainly don't want to give money that's going to end up in the hands of our enemies like Hamas. We do not need to do that. We've uncovered that as a result of some of our legislative committee hearings, and as a result of that, we stopped funding them this year, and we need to make that permanent.
Thank you so much, Congressman Nathaniel Moran of Texas. Always an honor to have you on the program. We so appreciate your leadership there in Congress, both for the principles that we all cherish, but also for kingdom principles that we also cherish and desperately need. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Jody. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.